This is the Brave New Coin Crypto Conversation, hosted by Andy Pickering.
Hi everyone, Andy Pickering here. I'm your host and welcome to the Crypto Conversation, a Brave New Coin podcast where we talk to the people building the future in the Bitcoin, blockchain and cryptocurrency space. Hi everyone, I know we're all hurting right now. Crypto has taken a beating, and Goldman Sachs says flatlining is the best case for stock-heavy portfolios. Flatlining? Zero returns? Sheesh. In situations like these, we can take a cue from the world's best investors, because a groundbreaking Ernst & Young study last year revealed that 8 in 10 ultra-high net worth individuals invest in alternatives. However, Bank of America's CIO recommends investing in one specific high-performing alternative to rescue your cash. He's talking about fine art. 2/3 of millionaires already hedge against inflation with art, according to UBS, because the last time inflation was this high, art appreciated by an unprecedented 33.2% annually. Now, obviously, most folks don't exactly have tens of millions lying around to start buying Banksys and Basquiat's, but that's where Masterworks comes in. They're helping people keep their cash intact by offering fractional investments in the top 1% of the art world. And with a recession on the horizon, they've seen sign-ups increase by 320%. That, combined with the fact that they speak to every investor to make sure art is right for them. That means there's a wait list, but I'm hooking you guys up with priority access to skip the line, and it's as easy as going to masterworks.com and using promo code CryptoConversation. That's masterworks.com, promo code CryptoConversation, and you can see important Regulation A disclosures at masterworks.com/CD. Again, that's masterworks.com, and use the promo code CryptoConversation to skip the line. And now, folks, it is on with the show. My guest today is Kyle Fry. Kyle is the CEO and co-founder of DIGTL, and that is actually spelled DIGTL, and the website is digtl.co if you want to check it out, folks. But what is DIGTL? Well, we're going to learn all about it today, but I think essentially it is a platform to connect the world's best assets with global investors through a network of digital securities exchanges. Hey, welcome to the show, Kyle.
Thanks, Andy. Happy to be here.
So just before we dive into DIGTL, I think it would be a good, Kyle, if we could just get to know a little bit about your good self, please. So I'd love it if you could, introduce yourself. Just tell us a little bit about your background, your career path, and what you've been doing in the lead up to co-founding DIGTL.
Yeah, sure. So I've always been sort of a tinkerer with tech, through childhood, sort of high school, and through university. My undergrad was actually in computer information systems, and I graduated in 2002. So you can start to think about how that lays on to what was going on with the internet and all sorts of things at the beginning of sort of the e-commerce wave, et cetera, but sort of technology and the internet and computers were taking over. So it was really the starting point on the tech side. I worked at a corporation for about 5 years, did a bunch of various roles, but all sort of tech related, building databases and providing analysis on data for the sales team, marketing, operations. And I started to get into finance. And so I looked at where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do and how I could have a shape a bigger impact, and sort of realized that, having lived in the Midwest my whole life, and then in Denver, Colorado for a bit, I thought it made sense to get to a bigger city, really kind of dig in on the finance side. And so I left Colorado, went to New York City, got my MBA at Columbia in finance to shift careers into the finance side at Wall Street. I did investment banking after business school for 10 years at Credit Suisse, doing largely tech M&A for probably most of that. I think there was a little bit of industrials and some others, but largely speaking, tech M&A, and it was payments. In about 2018, I'd read a ton on Bitcoin, and I'd been following the space, and again, what it was doing to sort of payments and crypto and all these elements. And I left Credit Suisse in 2018. So I've been in the digital asset space for 5 years now, building. I'd say my focus for the last 5 years has been in and around how tokenization and blockchain can really penetrate and sort of support the changes in the capital market side. So less sort of payments and crypto tokens and more regulated tokenization of assets, and really sort of taking all the really cool stuff we all know and love on blockchain and Bitcoin and applying that in the capital markets context.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense, Kyle. And I suppose then, why don't we just learn a bit more about digital then? So what's the kind of the big idea here?
Yeah, so and I think you hit it dead on, Andy, when you laid it out at the beginning. But at the super simplest level, we're trying to remove all the noise and value extraction and problems between an investor and an issuer. So if you take investor on one side and an issuer on the other side, and you draw a straight line, that's what we're trying to do. Now, the things that sort of make that a bit more complicated are things like securities laws and intermediaries and banking licenses, et cetera. So we use technology and services to break that down. And blockchain is a big component of how we're going to be able to do that. But at a super high level, on the issuer side, so I think the most unique thing we bring to the table, and really the magic of how we can draw that line, is we can provide that line between issuers and assets and securities and people that want to raise capital to retail investors. And so every average Joe can get access to these companies. So on one side, issuers, a fraction of the cost, they can raise money from any human being on the planet. So there's always been this issue of institutions and sort of this accredited only model. And we've built the regulatory and services and technology framework to allow them to raise capital from retail investors and allow trading to retail investors. And then on the retail investing side, we're giving people access to stuff they've never had before. And one step further, what we really want to do to bring all this home is go out to that investing community of people and say, hey, what do you want to invest in? Unless you just go to Robinhood or Fidelity, et cetera, and you're kind of given a menu in front of you and you're saying, here, you can buy Tesla, you can buy this, but why not ask them what they can actually, what they want to invest in? So that's a step further removed, but simply it's the technology and services to connect asset issuers and investors more closely. So any asset class, any investor type from anywhere in the world. And that's what we built.
Well, that sounds quite an exciting prospect then, Kyle. So again, maybe just to expand on that context. So I think you just said that it could be anyone issuing any asset across effectively any asset class to any potential investor anywhere in the world. But I mean, there must be a few barriers to cross before you can make that happen in a regulatory compliant manner, shall we say. So where are we at in terms of that journey at the moment?
Yeah, so that's right at the heart of it, Andy. And if people are following along, this is where the complexities get kicked in for sure. Yes. So everyone knows, if you let's bucket the US environment in one bucket. Let's bucket the jurisdiction of whoever is issuing the asset, so wherever they're incorporated, which could be any country in the world. And then let's bucketize sort of how do investors find that asset, right? Marketing and solicitation. So those are the three big buckets that really require the most amount of work. So first, there's the US bucket. We're all aware of the issues and challenges around securities laws there. If you're a US issuer, for example, you do have things like Reg CF or Reg A, which allows you to raise from US retail investors. If you're a Canadian issuer, you can actually tap into that Reg A as well to get US retail investors. But that leaves a lot of other issuers in how do I approach the United States and get US retail access, which sometimes the answer just may very well be either not right away or let's approach this wrong, because most people do not want to register a prospectus in the United States, right? That's where you start getting into hundreds and thousands, if not millions of dollars. So in order to do this properly, it's about how do I navigate the United States? Some people exclude them entirely. And there are ways to attack the United States in the secondary markets by having things trade in secondary, because the rules in the United States are very heavy on the primary offering, where US investors are giving capital to a company. But in the secondary market, it's where those shares start trading there. It's a little easier to start bringing US companies in there, or US investors in there later. Now, that said, there's typically a restricted or holding period where US investors cannot touch it at all. But there are other regulations where people are doing now. We're actually doing one of a current quote unquote global IPO we're running now. It went from, we were going to run a Reg CF, and you can get an SPV in the United States and switch and have a US entity to run Reg CF. But we've switched that because they actually are able to use another exemption, which means we don't have to go the Reg CF route. So as you can hear in some of my description here, the US is the toughest market to sort of crack from that perspective. You can always go after accredited investors. That's sort of this standard sort of 506B or C, et cetera, in terms of attacking there. But that's a whole conversation in its own. It depends on the issuer. What are they trying to achieve? How big are they? Is the US market the most important market? But there's guidance and advisory to do that. So there are pieces to solve there. Let's go to the second bucket, which is the jurisdiction of the country. Now, as you look at the jurisdiction of the country, it's very important that they meet their own regulatory securities laws. So let's take a Canadian or a British company, for example. Question number one is, do you guys want access to the United States? Okay, cool. So let's try to figure that out with lawyers. Let's figure the attack. What's the budget? What's the timeline? How does it fit? There's that bucket. Then it's like, okay, what can you do, UK regulator, or what do you do, UK company, to make sure you don't have to file with your own regulator? Because again, filing with a regulator is sort of, that becomes the super costly thing. And that's where regulators take the most look, is how are you going after my citizens of my country because you are incorporated here? And so you really got to step in there. And most times what you can do is you can actually meet the exemption requirements, or you can exclude the citizens in your home jurisdiction entirely. So there's different ways to approach that. We are helping a Canadian company now. They are actually exempting out of having to file a prospectus with the regulator, because they're meeting the exemption, saying, hey, in Canada, we're actually only going to go after accredited investors or people that are considered business associates. And these two exemptions allow you to basically raise capital with that group. Now, here's where sort of the magic starts to come out, is this other piece, which is marketing solicitation and a stock exchange. So if you list on a stock exchange that meets global regulatory standards, and so these global standards, there's a regulatory framework called IOSCO. IOSCO manages all of the securities regulators around the world, including the SEC and the FCA in the UK, et cetera. All the big names belong to this. And it's a global regulatory framework that says, let's all make sure we're all meeting these regulatory standards, investor protections, and the ability of what are the disclosure requirements you got to have in documents, et cetera, et cetera. And so and I think most of the audience knows, when you think of stock exchange, you think of the NASDAQ or the London Stock Exchange and these big name exchanges in and around the world. Well, as you look at them, the stock exchanges we're listing on have the same regulatory frameworks. They meet those standards. World Federation of Exchanges. And in fact, we work with the MERS exchange a lot. If you list on the MERS exchange, you can cross-list onto OTC markets in the United States. So it already meets the legacy infrastructure standards. So now when you combine these things, how are we going to attack the US? What am I doing in my home jurisdiction? And then you, quote unquote, list on a stock exchange, you almost do the equivalent of an IPO document or an S1. And it meets global standards. It's never as challenging and arduous as the United States regulatory framework, which even in London and other places around the world, they say, wow, quarterly financial statements, all these other things, there are lawsuits, there's a lot going on in the United States, are more, interim financials and don't require quarterly. So most global follows this framework. And then you kind of got the United States, who is a bit more stringent, which means costly. If you take that and you meet the regulatory requirements of the stock exchange listing, then you can in fact take capital from anywhere in the world, because you have now met the requirements of global standards. Now, where the trick is, and this is where legal help always is the marketing and solicitation associated with people coming in. Now, what we solve today that helps a lot of folks, especially those as companies go more global, as companies start to interact through social media with their communities, businesses are building communities, right? And so this idea that I'm raising capital for my own communities is a very different line than broadly publicly soliciting on a Super Bowl commercial or putting your name on an arena or whatever in a country. Is very different. Reaching out to your community, putting things on your website, talking about your story, and then people later finding out, oh, I can also invest in this company. So there are ways to do it. Now, obviously, they're super nuanced. I think, Andy, we can dig in there if you'd like. I don't want to super rabbit hole in here because obviously there's a super complex nuances to these pieces. But I think at a super high level, that's sort of the framework at which how you can take an asset and start to begin how it's able to put in the hands of retail investors. And then there's sort of the primary market versus the secondary market aspect.
Got it, Kyle. Thank you. And well, briefly then, I mean, typically, can you give us an idea of what stage these businesses that are going to be wanting to issue assets on your platform? I mean, I'm sure there's many of them around the world. Difficult just to kind of lump them all into one bucket. But yeah, just give us a sense as to the kinds of businesses and kind of what stage they're at in their journey to kind of raising capital.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we live to serve basically, and we'll even serve folks like Tesla, for example. And why different than Tesla? Most of the companies that IPO, we're looking to serve the very small and venture side of the market up through where it makes sense. And I do think even what we're building, when you compare to things like the NASDAQ, we have 20 trading hours. You can fund your account with crypto. You can actually self-custody your own assets. And so it's when it starts to move into things that people want to manage. We do have gross immediate settlement. So none of this issues with T+2 that you have on NASDAQ where the GameStop issues happen. So even starting to compare with the NASDAQ, there are substantially better capabilities here, which could also allow, Tesla to have its shares available and have all that stuff happen while people that don't have interactive brokerage or fidelity accounts, like 4 billion people of the planet, may not have access to the current infrastructure there is there, but still want to get access to a Tesla. That's not the market we're focused on, but that's the pieces that we can provide at that high end of the market. The global IPO I mentioned earlier, it's raising $3 million. So we can serve a much smaller market because we are doing this at a fraction of the cost of the way even potentially running a private placement and having a lawyer run the whole offering memorandum, and then you're sort of stuck. The shares can't trade. There's a lot of pieces that may not work. It's hard to add tokenization later. And those pieces. So the global IPO we're running now is super interesting. It's a debt instrument by a company producing cash flow. It's a positive company, 10-year operating history, non-dilutive to the founders, debt instrument. And what's really cool about it from an investor perspective is he's raising from his community. They can help the company grow and they love their products. And he's doing it as a debt instrument. And thereby, if they invest, say, $5,000, if they don't recoup their $5,000 over a 5-year period based on the upside of the revenue growth, the company will reimburse them all the way up that $5,000. So downside protection while they get the upside basis in the growth of the company. And so you can see we can serve the small market, provide retail investors of the community of this business access to his business in a compliant manner and do it at a fraction of the cost. But at the same time, as I mentioned, Andy, we can actually enhance Tesla shares in the global marketplace as well. So it's kind of the full spectrum, but the companies we're talking to are anywhere from that global IPO of $3 million to Blockstream. We just listed Blockstream mining note and made it accessible to every global retail investor around the planet. And Wall Street Bets is another big organization that we're working with to bring products to the masses as well.
Nice, got it. And interesting that you mentioned Blockstream, because I wanted to ask you, Kyle, about Bitcoin really, and how Bitcoin fits into this, because what you're talking about, is quite a long way removed from a Bitcoin just as a kind of store of value or digital gold style asset. But I know that you have some quite firm views on Bitcoin. You've worked with the guys at Blockstream, who are obviously passionate Bitcoiners. So yeah, love to hear how Bitcoin starts to fit into this vision as well.
Yeah, and I'd say that's probably one of the most important things that's happened this year. As I said, I've been in the space for 5 years, and I think I personally only own Bitcoin. Mostly, probably 95% of the last 5 years, I've only owned Bitcoin. More because of just how I see it being the thing for the next 20, 50, 100 years, long duration time horizon, and not getting involved in sort of the trading and the speculation. But on the Bitcoin side, what's really happened this year for us is everything I've talked about to this point, Andy, is not contingent on tokenization or blockchain. Okay. Blockchain and tokenization merely enhances a significant amount of it. Better, cheaper, faster. You can move things, self-custody. You start loaning against things. Shares want to move from one trading venue to another. On-chain voting rights, distributions on-chain, dividends, etc. So much more efficient of a model when you add on blockchain. We had actually had our own in-house proprietary blockchain that we had forked from something else, knowing it was an enhancement. And I think the relationship and the idea that Liquid, the side chain of Bitcoin that now allows transactions on the blockchain to be settled, and how do you pay for those transactions? Well, you pay with Bitcoin. That we can actually tokenize assets the same way that people have done on other chains that are doing regulated securities on blockchain. Now we can do that on Bitcoin. And so imagine if you can see that the base layer of all monetary assets in the world as digital gold, i.e. Bitcoin, and as things like Lightning Network turn it into more of a payment mechanism, it's going to be really hard for in my view, a lot of these other blockchains to find a way to fit. As now with Liquid, even though Liquid's been around for years, I think we will be probably one of the biggest proliferators of Liquid on the planet because of how we're doing it on the issuer and investor side, that we can take the assets and tokenize them on Liquid and the base layer of monetary currency to pay for the transactions that happen on Liquid is Bitcoin. So now, not only that is the beginning of these transactions, but where I see this going much longer term, Andy, is this, today, I would say even Canadian companies are denominating their market caps and their shares and their offerings in the US dollar. I'm in the States here. A lot of people say, what's wrong with the US dollar? It kind of acts as sort of the store of value, et cetera. Obviously, we know with inflationary and the break in 1971 from the gold standard, et cetera, that's what they're all saying. But the reality is, as we move to Bitcoin, where we want to get is Bitcoin denominated markets. And so you start to remove the fiat component of these, and you can start to put assets and denominate them in Bitcoin to start to remove that. Now, we're a bit a ways from that happening, but as you start to think about it, what we've built today is the first national stock exchange with Bitcoin in the center of it. So a Bitcoin national stock exchange, which will be right at the heart of it. And you can see how sort of payments and store value and the gold idea of what Bitcoin starts to actually power and back end not only the blockchain protocol that secures the network, but also the money that moves in between all of these various assets.
Absolutely fascinating, Kyle. I love it. So I think I'd love to get your perspectives on, I suppose, the kind of the thinking or the placement in the market with Bitcoin at the moment, and what needs to happen for Bitcoin to be perhaps more positively perceived again. And obviously it's a really complex issue. There's a lot of different factors. The market is simply down at the moment. There's pressure from the ESG, the climate squad, who very much don't like Bitcoin's proof of work, the mining. Yeah. So there's all this stuff, and yet what is also fascinating, and I'm sure you can speak to this, Kyle, is there is support from Bitcoin in the US from both sides of the house, and sure, there's anti-Bitcoin movements on I guess from every angle as well, but there's support from every angle, which just goes to show that there's something special there with Bitcoin. But yeah, how do you think about Bitcoin and its current place in the market, and how do you see these kind of complex narratives evolving in the decade ahead?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's so hard to not talk about price, right? Because that's sort of the barometer of how we see it fitting, yeah, exactly, into the broader ecosystem. And people pay their bills still mostly in US dollars or their local currency in fiat, and it's not quite there on Bitcoin. And it has moved up and down. Obviously, if we zoom out and you start to compare Bitcoin as an asset class to other stuff, it's gone up. I mean, it's still up substantially, I think, over most of the stock market over several different periods. But it was at 70,000 at one point, and it's dropped all the way down. So I think politicians and governments, and let's just shove in, we'll call it Wall Street, but you know what I mean, organizations, businesses, incumbents that have sort of power and control over how we live outside of government. That's sort of, if you smash all them together, there's a massive headwinds in terms of people trying to figure out how, A, they're going to lose power and control no matter what if we move to this world, and B, how do I make money or still be in the game? And a lot of them don't know where and how they fit, because the reality of it is Bitcoin was such a special thing that it's not meant to give people control of power. It was meant to give power back to the people. And I think realizing that from a new standard, that this is about proliferation and self-sovereignty and the ability of people to really take hold of their wealth and their assets, that's going to be a power struggle. I mean, hundreds and thousands of years. So kings and royals and Egyptians, it's all been about this power struggle. And we're finally getting to a place, it seems, to where Bitcoin is beginning to solve that problem for the average person on the planet, the other, 99.99% of the planet. So, there are a lot of adoption things happening. I think things like Lightning Network, you've got, your Sailors and your Jack Dorseys and Samson and Adam Back, and you've got these massive names out there providing real things. I think where Bitcoin is going to continue to come in, I think for, more emerging markets, it tends to become, where they have massive inflationary problems in Venezuela and some of these other countries, where Bitcoin is actually more stable and it's less reliant on the banking infrastructure. And they have been known to take money from people, way more important for them today than it is, say, like, the developed economies of the world in OECD, North America, here in the United States. But as Bitcoin becomes just a better mechanism in payment and proliferates through more of what we'll say organic growth and bootstrapping, and our community growth, bottoms up versus top down, it's just going to take hold. It's got to be just so obvious when you start to look at this thing that no one controls, taking over such an important part of how we interact as humans, that all this stuff happening in the markets, are we going to get a Bitcoin ETF, and where's the price? And, both sides of these things in the grand scheme are sort of noise, but they absolutely slow things down. And we do have to get people there, and it's going to take time for adoption. But I mean, that's sort of somewhat of the challenge with Bitcoin, particularly. And to me, this sort of bleeds right into the conversation around other blockchains and crypto in general, with 20,000 coins and 300 different crypto exchanges, is people look at Bitcoin and they kind of group it in with all this other stuff. And they say, I love this stuff. I see it go up 1,000x. I'm going to invest, in all these things, versus sort of Bitcoin and all these other things. And I think as people put out coins, and there's unregistered securities, and there's pump and dump schemes, and there's Terra Luna stuff that happens, people bucket it all together and they kind of bring it out. So I think there's so much noise in the world still. And even I think regulators are still barely just getting it. Politicians and governments and people are still barely understanding that Bitcoin is not the same thing as all this other stuff, right? I do think Ethereum solved a massive problem or, solution with smart contracts, and people were ICOing, and it made it a bit more easier, and not the transaction block speeds in Bitcoin weren't there yet. But all of that stuff, to me, with Ethereum and beyond, I see as sort of a crypto sandbox where you start to take the really cool stuff like zero knowledge proof and privacy and full autonomy, not pseudonymous transactions like Bitcoin. How do we take that cool stuff and put it on Bitcoin? And because that's ultimately the base layer of everything. So if people can get to that level of thinking, this self-sovereign thing that no human or nothing can ever interact with, and we're now removing governments and intermediaries when it comes to wealth and your assets, that's so beautiful. And if you can get to that thesis, then you start to understand, does the price of Bitcoin really matter? What is all this other stuff in crypto? And how do I just position myself, my family, and what I'm building towards that idea that the Bitcoin protocol will sort of rule them all and be the thing that sort of helps move us into the future of a total digital infrastructure.
I love it, Kyle. The Bitcoin protocol that rules them all and will move us into a purely self-sovereign digital future. And look, I've no doubt that this is indeed the path that we're on, Kyle. I guess the one question that everyone has is, what kind of time frame this takes place on? Because really, we're only 12, 13 years since the deployment of the Bitcoin blockchain, and obviously incredible things have happened in that time. But as people like to say, we are still simply early, and I think that's just a good framework to think about this stuff. Let's go to a very quick break, Kyle, and then we will come back. We'll have some fun. We'll run you through the very famous Crypto Conversation Hot Take Round. We'll be back in 1 second.
Here's what's being said about Masterworks.
My name is Jacob N. I'm from Long Island, and I've invested over $73,000 with Masterworks. My portfolio performance just wasn't cutting it. I researched all these alternative investments, like crypto and NFTs, but they didn't make sense to me. Then I read about Masterworks in Forbes, and I signed up right away. And now you can too. Thanks, Masterworks.
Get VIP access at masterworks.io and use promo code JACOB. See important disclosures at masterworks.io/DC.
All right, we are back, and I'm with Kyle Fry, CEO and co-founder of DIGTL, the platform that is connecting the world's best assets with global investors, and doing some cool stuff with Bitcoin via Blockstream's liquid side chain as well. Hey, Kyle, I like to finish each podcast with a quick round of rapid-fire crypto conversation hot takes. Are you up for it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Just going to run some questions at you, Kyle. So just, give me your kind of quick, snappy answers, hot take style. No right or wrong way to do it. Question 1, be fascinated to see what you have to say. Where would you say you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-chain opportunist spectrum, Kyle?
I'd say I'm probably 9.9 out of 10. I'd say I'd change it slightly to being Bitcoin maximalist and steal the phrase technology maximalist, and Bitcoin is the best technology.
I like it. I love it. All right. What would you say, Kyle, is your firmest conviction crypto opinion?
Maybe come at me again with that question and maybe rephrase just so I...
Okay, so what opinion do you have about crypto or Bitcoin or blockchain that you have the most conviction in? What belief?
Yeah, I think that crypto has a significant amount of innovation and smart people there, and really cool stuff is happening, but ultimately it will get built and moved onto Bitcoin overall.
I love it. All right. Bill Gates famously said that we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. So, whatever you like here, Kyle, kind of global capital markets, digital issuance, digital itself, Bitcoin, what does it all start to look like in 10 years' time?
Yeah, I think the former chairman of NASDAQ said it well, I think, but he said it in maybe 2019, was every asset on the planet can be tokenized. Every asset on Wall Street can be tokenized, and in 5 years, everything will be. He's probably running out of time by next year. I think that, trading and volumes and all this stuff, is picking up. I think this idea of what we've built on top of Bitcoin is absolutely going to accelerate everything in and around that. But I think for sure, next 10 years, 5 years, etc., we will be having a very different conversation and probably competing head to head with NASDAQ and other trading venues like that.
Very nice. All right. Well, sci-fi author William Gibson said famously that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Can you think of an example of the future being here right now, Kyle? But most people aren't really aware of it.
Yeah, I think it's that you can invest in any asset you want from anywhere you want, and as an issuer, you can make your shares available to anyone on the planet. Easy as that.
Hard to argue with that. Time to zoom out, time to get weird just for a second as we start to finish off, Kyle. What do you see as the long-term future for the human race? Do you see dystopia or utopia?
Oh man, I tried to answer this without. This is all. So in our mission, we basically are here to provide capital and resources to people that are changing the world for a better way. So anyone can build a business and they can raise capital using securities laws from investors to make the world a better place. All of these people, we want to enhance people making the world a better place. And so I absolutely see Utopia. I think that we are bringing as much as we possibly can to the table to support that. And if my legacy is nothing but leaving this planet knowing that I helped facilitate people making the world better and connecting them with people that have the capital and the resources, then I've done my job.
Very nice. All right, let's finish this off. Finally, Kyle, what is your favorite science fiction book, film, or TV show?
Oh man, that is a hard one. I think mostly because of recency, I've got to go with Game of Thrones. I'm watching the prequel right now, and did some of the reading of the books, but I'm watching the new series out from 200 years before the Game of Thrones started.
Yeah, we're watching that new Game of Thrones series as well. You enjoying
Nice.
it?
Yes, I am. It's very bloody, but I'm ready for it now.
Yeah. Well, if it wouldn't be Game of Thrones if it wasn't,
No, it
people getting, people using limbs and being decapitated and stabbed and
Yes.
having eyes gouged out.
Or crabs eating them. Yep.
Yeah. All that good stuff. Kyle, this has been fun. I've enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for coming on the show. Best way to finish this off is, again, just tell people where they can find you on Twitter, wherever else you like to hang out, and where they can go just to learn more about digital and what you guys are doing and how they can get involved.
Absolutely. So digtl.co, digital.co, and I'm at Kyle Fry on Twitter. 2 Kyles, that is, at Kyle Fry on Twitter.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Kyle. All the best, and bye for now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy.
All right, there you go. That was Kyle from Digital. That was a fun one. Kyle can talk. Got some fantastic ideas over at Digital, so it'd be fascinating to see how that all plays out. I'm going to keep an eye on that. Digital.co. Link will be in the show notes, of course. Yeah, that's today's show. Thanks for listening, team. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave New Coin. See you.